In the quiet town of Waterloo, nothing exciting ever seemed to happen. For most of the year, birds chirped, the trees swayed in the breeze, and people went about their daily lives. But once a year, something mysterious and magical would sweep through the town. As the air cooled and the autumn winds whistled warm, a strange sight would appear in the distance. Green fireballs floated through the darkening sky. The people of Waterloo were afraid of these lights. They told their children to stay indoors and close the windows tight. Some said they were witches coming to steal children away, while others thought it was some strange natural phenomenon. No one knew for sure, but Violet, a brave and curious 10-year-old girl, didn't believe the scary stories. She had always been fascinated by the green lights. One night, as she stared out of her window, watching them flicker like stars, her curiosity got the best of her. I need to know what those lights are, Violet thought, her heart racing with excitement. Her mother had warned her to stay inside, but Violet had a plan. She stuffed a pillow under her blanket to make it look like she was sleeping, then quietly slipped out of the house, tiptoeing past her snoring grandmother. With the green fireballs glowing in the sky, Violet followed them through the dark streets and into the autumn forest. The orange and red leaves crunched beneath her feet as she ventured deeper into the woods. The fireballs floated just ahead, leading her to a place she had never seen before, a grand, hidden mansion nestled among the trees. Violet hid behind a tree and watched in amazement. The green flames descended from the sky, gently touching the trees without burning them. As the fireballs reached the ground, they transformed into witches, tall, short, plump, thin, some with pointy hats, others with flowing cloaks. They all wore black and carried old brooms. But instead of being afraid, Violet felt more curious than ever. The witches laughed and greeted each other like old friends. They seemed happy, not scary at all. Together, they entered the mansion, which glowed with a warm orange and red light, filling the night with giggles and music. Violet's heart raced with excitement. "I have to see what's going on in there," she whispered to herself. She hurried back home, where her grandmother was still fast asleep, and crawled into bed. But she couldn't stop thinking about the witches and their hidden mansion. The next day, Violet came up with a plan. Her parents were going to be working late, and her grandmother always went to bed early. This would be her chance to sneak back to the mansion. But this time, she wouldn't just follow the witches, she would be one of them. She rummaged through the house and found an old black curtain that she turned into a cloak. She grabbed a pointy black hat from a passing scavenger the week before and took her mom's oldest broom. But something still didn't feel right. All the witches had something special, Violet thought, pacing back and forth. Then she had an idea. Her blonde hair didn't fit the witchy look, so she grabbed a bottle of grape juice from the fridge and poured it all over her hair. Her hair turned a vibrant purple, just like her name. Perfect, she grinned at her reflection. Now I really look like a witch. That evening, as her grandmother snored away, Violet slipped out of the house once more. She dashed through the streets, following the green fireballs as they floated toward the forest. This time, she wore her makeshift witch costume, hoping to blend in with the witches she saw the night before. When she reached the mansion, the witches were gathering again, their laughter echoing through the trees. Violet took a deep breath, straightened her hat, and marched up to the gate. A tall witch with glowing green eyes looked down at her. Well, what do we have here?" the witch said, raising an eyebrow. Violet's heart skipped a beat. I'm a witch too," she stammered, trying to sound confident. The witch leaned in closer, inspecting Violet's purple hair. Then, to her surprise, the witch smiled warmly. "You've got the look, kid," she said with a wink. "Come on in." Violet couldn't believe her luck. She followed the witches into the mansion, her eyes wide with wonder. Inside, the walls were lined with twinkling lights, glowing pumpkins, and tables filled with candy, cookies, and magical treats. The witches weren't planning anything scary at all, they were throwing the most amazing Halloween party Violet had ever seen. There were cauldrons bubbling with delicious potions, broom races in the grand hall, and even a corner where witches were swapping magical spells and stories. Violet felt completely at home. Suddenly, the head witch, a tall woman with silver hair and a sparkling cape, stood up and called for silence. "Welcome, sisters, and our new friend," she said, looking at Violet with a knowing smile. "Every year, we gather here not to scare or harm, but to celebrate the magic of Halloween, the joy of friendship, and the beauty of being different." The witches cheered, and Violet's heart swelled with happiness. She realized then that the green lights weren't something to be feared. The witches weren't monsters, they were just magical beings who came together to celebrate in their own special way. As the party continued, Violet laughed, danced, and enjoyed the night like never before. When it was time to go, the head witch approached her again, kneeling down to meet Violet's eye level. "You're quite the curious one, aren't you?" the head witch said softly, her eyes twinkling. Violet nodded, a little shy but still beaming with excitement. "I just wanted to know the truth about the green lights," she admitted. The head witch chuckled and stood tall, her cape shimmering. "Curiosity is what makes a good witch, after all. It's what keeps magic alive." As she said this, the head witch raised her hand, and in a swirl of glowing mist, her appearance began to change. The sparkling cape disappeared, and her silver hair turned familiar, into soft grey curls. Violet gasped. "Grandma!" Her grandmother smiled warmly, her eyes still twinkling with that magical glow. Surprised? "I've been the head witch of Waterloo for many, many years," she said. "And I'm proud of you, Violet. Your curiosity, your bravery, that's what makes a true witch." Violet's jaw dropped. Her grandmother was the head witch all along. The thought made her giggle in amazement. "You've always had the heart of a witch, Violet," her grandmother said, wrapping her in a warm hug. "And now you know, being a witch isn't about scaring people. It's about embracing who you are and finding the magic in everything, especially in your curiosity." Violet smiled, feeling proud and excited. As she and her grandmother walked home together under the fading green lights, Violet knew that Halloween would never be the same. She wasn't just a curious girl from a boring town anymore, she was part of something magical. Moral: curiosity and bravery are the heart of true magic, and the most wonderful discoveries happen when you embrace who you truly are. Violet couldn't believe what had just happened. Her grandmother, the same sweet woman who baked cookies and knitted scarves, was the head witch of Waterloo. As they walked home under the soft glow of the fading green lights, the night felt more magical than ever. "Are there other witches in town?" Violet asked, still buzzing with excitement. Her grandmother smiled knowingly. "There are more witches around than you might think, Violet. Some of us blend in perfectly. We don't all wear pointy hats and ride brooms, you know." Violet's mind raced. Were her teachers witches? The mailman? The librarian? She had so many questions, but before she could ask them, her grandmother held up a finger. Now, young witch," she said with a wink. "You'll learn everything in time. But remember, our magic is meant to help, not harm. That's the first lesson of being a witch." They reached home just before dawn. Her grandmother gave her a quick hug before heading to bed, leaving Violet standing in the hallway, still holding her makeshift broom. She grinned at her purple hair in the mirror, feeling prouder than ever. But just as she started heading to her room, her grandmother called out softly, "Get some rest, Violet. You'll need your energy for tomorrow." Violet froze. "Tomorrow?" she echoed, her heart skipping a beat. Her grandmother chuckled from her room. "Oh yes, tomorrow's just the beginning." The next morning, Violet woke up feeling more excited than ever. She quickly threw on her clothes, grabbed a bite of toast, and ran outside, hoping to find more signs of magic. But the town of Waterloo looked as ordinary as ever. The birds flew, the trees swayed, and people went about their usual business. No green fireballs, no witches in sight. Was it all just a dream? Violet wondered as she wandered through town. Just as she was about to give up hope, she noticed something strange. Mr. Donnelly, the grumpy old man who ran the town bakery, was sweeping the sidewalk outside his shop with a broom. But as Violet watched, the broom seemed to move on its own, sweeping the dust away without Mr. Donnelly even touching it. Violet's eyes widened. Could he be? Before she could approach him, her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "You'll learn everything in time." Violet knew she had to be patient. She returned home and waited for nightfall, eager to find out what her grandmother had in store. That evening, just as the last rays of the setting sun disappeared behind the trees, her grandmother appeared in her doorway. She wasn't wearing her usual cozy robe. Instead, she wore a flowing, deep purple cloak, embroidered with tiny silver stars that seemed to twinkle in the dim light. "It's time, Violet," her grandmother said, a warm smile on her face. Violet's heart pounded with excitement. "Time for what?" "To start your training," her grandmother replied, leading her outside. They walked through the quiet streets of Waterloo, the full moon casting long shadows on the ground. The town felt different at night, more mysterious and alive. As they reached the edge of the forest, Violet noticed something strange. The green fireballs were back, floating gently in the sky, but this time they seemed to be waiting. Her grandmother waved her hand, and the fireballs floated down, circling around them like glowing lanterns. "Whoa," Violet breathed, amazed. "These aren't just lights, Violet," her grandmother explained. "They're guardians of magic. They protect our town and watch over the witches here. Tonight, they will guide you to your first lesson." Violet's eyes sparkled with wonder. "What's my first lesson?" Her grandmother smiled softly. "Every witch must learn to listen to the wind, the trees, and the world around them. Magic isn't just spells and potions. It's about understanding nature and respecting it." The green lights began to drift deeper into the forest, and her grandmother motioned for Violet to follow. As they walked through the woods, Violet felt the air change. The wind whispered through the trees, and the leaves seemed to shimmer with a life of their own. It was as if the whole forest was alive with magic. Suddenly, they stopped in front of an ancient tree, its roots twisting deep into the earth. Her grandmother knelt beside it and placed her hand on the bark. "This tree is older than any witch in Waterloo," she said. "It holds the secrets of the forest, and tonight, it will teach you something very important." Violet knelt beside her grandmother, placing her hand on the tree as well. At first, she felt nothing, just the rough texture of the bark. But as she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, something incredible happened. She could hear the tree. It whispered in soft, rustling tones, telling her stories of the seasons, of the creatures that lived in its branches, and the magic that flowed through its roots. "It's talking to me," Violet whispered in awe. Her grandmother nodded. "The magic of the forest is alive, Violet. It's always been here, but only those who listen can hear it." For hours, Violet sat by the tree, learning its secrets. She discovered that the green lights weren't just protectors, they were part of the forest itself, spirits of nature that kept balance and harmony. And as the night went on, Violet realized something important. Magic wasn't just about casting spells. It was about understanding the world around her and seeing the magic in everyday life. By the time they returned home, the first light of dawn was breaking through the horizon. Violet felt different, like she had grown, not in height, but in understanding. She glanced at her grandmother, who looked at her with pride. "You've taken your first step, Violet, her grandmother said. There's so much more to learn, but you're already becoming a great witch. Violet smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She couldn't wait for the next lesson, for the next adventure. She wasn't just a curious girl from a boring town anymore. She was part of something magical, something bigger than she ever imagined. The days after Violet's first lesson passed quietly, but her curiosity had only grown. The magic of the forest still whispered in her mind, and every night she'd lie awake, wondering what other secrets it held. But as much as she had learned, she knew that magic wasn't always gentle or safe. There was a darker side to it, something her grandmother hadn't mentioned yet. One evening, just after dusk, Violet's grandmother appeared in her room. Her usual warmth was gone, replaced by a serious expression that made Violet sit up straight. Tonight, her grandmother said quietly, you're going to face something far more challenging than before. There is a part of the forest that even witches avoid, a place where shadows walk on their own, and whispers of lost magic fill the air. It's called the Shadow Woods. Violet's heart skipped a beat. What's in the Shadow Woods? Not what, but who, her grandmother replied, her voice low. There's an old witch who lives there, a powerful sorceress named Morgra. She was once part of our coven, but she turned to dark magic long ago. Morgra was cast out, but she never left. She lurks in the shadows, waiting for a curious soul to wander too far. You must face her. Violet's mouth went dry. Face her. Her grandmother placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression softening. Magic isn't just about learning what's easy and fun, Violet. Sometimes, you must confront the darkness to understand the light. Morgra is dangerous, but she's also full of knowledge. If you can pass her test, you'll grow stronger as a witch. Violet swallowed hard, feeling a mix of fear and determination. She had never backed down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. She nodded. I'll do it. That night, with her grandmother's parting words echoing in her ears, Violet ventured into the forest alone. The green fireballs that usually lit her path were nowhere to be seen. Instead, the woods were draped in thick, swirling fog, and the trees seemed to loom taller, their twisted branches reaching like skeletal fingers. As she walked deeper into the forest, the air grew colder. The familiar sounds of rustling leaves and chirping crickets faded, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed in on all sides. The moonlight barely pierced the canopy above, casting long, inky shadows across the path. Violet's breath quickened, her heart pounding in her chest. She clutched her broom tightly, knowing that this journey was nothing like the warm, magical night before. After what felt like hours, she reached the edge of the Shadow Woods. The trees here were blackened, their trunks gnarled and twisted like ancient, cursed bones. No wind stirred the leaves, and the silence was so heavy that even the softest footstep echoed like thunder. Suddenly, Violet heard a voice, soft, raspy, and filled with malice. It came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Who dares enter my domain? The voice whispered. Violet froze, her eyes darting around, searching for the source of the voice. A cold breeze swept through the trees, and out of the shadows stepped a figure cloaked in darkness. Her face was hidden beneath a hood, but her eyes, sharp and glowing like embers, pierced through the night. Morgra, Violet whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The sorceress smiled, a twisted grin that sent chills down Violet's spine. So, the head witch sends her little protégé to face me, does she? How amusing. You should turn back now, child. You don't know what you're playing with. Violet squared her shoulders, trying to hide her fear. I'm not afraid of you. I came here to learn. Morgra's laugh was sharp and cold, like the crack of brittle bones. Learn? Oh, you'll learn, child. But not all knowledge is worth having. Some things are better left in the dark. Without warning, The ground beneath Violet's feet began to shift. The shadows that clung to the trees seemed to stretch and slither toward her, curling around her legs like serpents. She gasped and tried to move, but the darkness held her in place, tightening its grip. Morgra stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with cruel delight. "You're brave, I'll give you that. But bravery alone won't save you." Violet struggled against the shadows, her heart racing. She could feel them creeping higher, cold and suffocating. Panic rose in her chest, but then, in the back of her mind, she heard her grandmother's voice. "Listen to the world around you. Magic is in everything." Taking a deep breath, Violet closed her eyes and focused. She tuned out the sinister whispers, the tightening shadows, and the icy fear creeping into her bones. Instead, she listened to the soft rustle of the leaves, to the faint hum of the earth beneath her feet, to the magic that pulsed in the air around her. Suddenly, she felt it, a faint warmth, a spark of energy deep within the forest. It was weak, but it was there, hidden beneath the layers of darkness. Violet reached out with her mind, drawing on the magic of the forest itself, just like her grandmother had taught her. The shadows around her flickered and wavered. Morgra's smile faltered. "No," the dark witch hissed. "How are you?" But before Morgra could finish, the shadows shattered like glass, dissolving into wisps of smoke. Violet took a step forward, her eyes glowing with newfound power. "You underestimate me," Violet said, her voice steady. "Magic isn't just darkness. It's everything, the trees, the wind, even the light." Morgra's face twisted with fury, but there was something else in her eyes too, fear. She raised her hand, summoning a swirling vortex of shadow that crackled with dark energy. "You think you can challenge me, little witch," she snarled. But before she could unleash her spell, a familiar voice echoed through the woods. "That's enough, Morgra." Violet turned to see her grandmother, standing tall and powerful at the edge of the clearing. Her cloak billowed in the wind, and her silver hair shone like moonlight. Morgra scowled but lowered her hand. "Ah, the head witch herself. Come to rescue your little apprentice, have you?" Violet's grandmother stepped forward, her eyes blazing with authority. "Violet doesn't need rescuing. She's already proven herself." Morgra's expression soured, but she said nothing. With a wave of her hand, she vanished into the shadows, leaving only the faint smell of smoke in her wake. Violet let out a shaky breath, the tension in her body finally easing. Her grandmother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did well, Violet. You faced the darkness and found the light within yourself. That's what being a witch is truly about." Violet nodded, though her heart still raced from the encounter. "Will she come back?" she asked, her voice small. Her grandmother's eyes softened. "Morgra is always there, lurking in the shadows. But now you know how to face her and any other darkness that might come your way." As they walked back through the forest, the fog lifted, and the familiar warmth of the trees returned. The green fireballs reappeared, gently guiding them home. Violet felt different, stronger somehow. She had faced something terrifying and come out the other side, not just as a witch in training, but as someone who truly understood the balance between light and shadow. That night, as Violet lay in bed, she couldn't help but smile. She had faced Morgra and the forest of shadows and discovered a strength within herself that she had never known she had. But more than that, she had learned that even the darkest places held a spark of light, if you were brave enough to find it, or at least that was what she thought. To be continued.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for reading The Witches of Waterloo, Part 1. I really hope you enjoyed it and that you're excited for Part 2. It's coming soon. At the end of the book, you'll also find some fun games to play, so be sure to check those out. If you haven't grabbed your copy yet, you can find the link in the description below. I'd really appreciate it if you do, as it helps support me in continuing the series. Don't forget to like this video and follow for updates on future releases. Thanks again for all your support. And remember that the most amazing tale is yours. Ciao!